As Adam mentioned, I serve as a director of the Legal Project, which is an activity of the Middle East Forum. Middle East Forum, as you may know, was founded by Dr. Daniel Pipes in 1994. In 2007, he founded the Legal Project as a result of all the lawsuits coming out against researchers, writers, and politicians from Islamists or terrorist charities or Islamic organizations. So our group, our mission is to promote the right freedom of speech on Islam, Islamic terrorism, and Islamists in the West. Our clients extend from here in the United States to Canada to 6 countries in Europe. So with that, I'd like to explain where we are right now, initially start on defamation of religion. As Adam was talking about, the laws against defamation of religion are far more common worldwide than laws against blasphemy and apostasy. As of 2011, 87 countries, that's 44%, had a law, rule, or policy at some level of government forbidding defamation of religion or hate speech against members of a religious group. So when the OIC is now pushing this agenda of defamation of religions or the Istanbul process as they'll cover it, it's also important to remember that since the group was founded in 1952, it is not bound by the 1949 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it doesn't recognize that. It's entered other charters or it's formed other charters, and it specifically always has never joined the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Meaning that in its view, it's not bound by Article 19, which provides the right to freedom of opinion and expression. It's not bound by Article 20, which provides the right of freedom of peaceful assembly and association. Also does not believe that no one may be compelled to belong to an association. So we've had a dramatic shift since the Obama administration took over. And I think it would also be important to look domestically what the Islamic community supports politically. We've had some recent, from the election just now, we've had some recent polling. I should say, in the Pew poll, out of over 125 million votes, let's say, 7% were unreligiously affiliated. They didn't measure in this Pew poll who said they were Islamic or Muslim. Of those 7%, Barack Obama got 74% of the vote. A CARE poll, Council of American Islamic Relations, that was published in October, said that 81% of Muslims were going to definitely vote. That's great. Another 10% would probably. 96% of them said that, quote-unquote, civil rights was the most important issue they were voting on. 66% self-identified as Democrats, 9% Republicans. 61% perceived the Democrats committed to protecting religious freedom, which I would say ask the Catholic Church if that's true. And in that poll, 68% said they support Barack Obama, 7% Mitt Romney. WorldNet Daily, I saw somebody's here from WorldNet Daily, nice to see you, released a poll on October 27th, and this poll found that 40% of Muslims in America polled believe that they should not be judged by U.S. law or the Constitution, but by Sharia. And the big winner in this poll was Barack Obama once again. He got 72% of the vote, 11%, for Romney, so that was the highest. So we would therefore understand possibly that see why Obama has decided to join this initiative. I mean, there's a sharp break from the Clinton administration on the defamation of religions issue, and certainly the Bush administration. Here's a small narrative that I like to talk to, which can lead into the video. And I'll go briefly because I don't want to ruin Claire's comments. In an interview with the Al Hawa TV in Cairo on February 1st, Justice Ginsburg advised the Egyptian government to use the Constitution of South Africa as the blueprint in drafting Egypt's constitution because it was, quote, a deliberate attempt to have a fundamental instrument of government that embraced basic human rights and an independent judiciary. And it really is, quote, I think, a great piece of work that was done, much more recent than the U.S. Constitution. This was fully embraced by the U.S. government as the U.S. Embassy in Cairo posted the interview during what was described as a diplomatic visit by Justice Ginsburg to, quote, listen and learn with her Egyptian counterparts as they begin Egypt's constitutional transition to democracy. I think Morsi proved that they're on a different path. Fellow Clinton appointee Justice Breyer, who has already expressed doubts to the U.S. media that the First Amendment allows the public burning of a Quran, despite the fact that the Supreme Court issued a 1989 ruling which gave First Amendment protection to anyone burning the American flag, has also recently partaken on drafting the issue or discussing the issue in his next book. This was in the Law Journal, New York Law Journal, in an interview. Leftist and activist judges in the past have found the rationale for allowing one preferred group a First Amendment privilege against another, and this can certainly be construed or could happen possibly in the future. On the diplomatic front, the outset of the Obama presidency, his administration openly embraced cooperation with the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to find an international agreement or framework on the OIC's long-term defamation initiative. While America never outright supported a defamation of religions resolution, which is what it was in 2009 and 2010, it was still called defamation of religions, the 2009 Obama administration did say in the UN Human Rights Council that they would like to push for effective measures to address and combat those who advocate religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence, while also condemning religious stereotypes. Yet, so even after that, in 2009 and 2010, the Obama administration's and their open cooperation with the OIC, they're trying to find a framework for defamation of religions. They voted against the resolution in the General Assembly in 2009, 2010, and at 2010, by the way, that was the lowest amount of support the resolution got in the last 8 years or 8 sessions. But the OIC wasn't finished in its attempt to criminalize the criticism of Islam. In March 2011, Pakistan, we have the OIC presented HRC 1618 to combat, quote, intolerance, negative stereotyping, and stigmatization of and discrimination, incitement to violence, and violence against persons based on religious belief, which called for, quote, strengthened international efforts to foster a global dialogue for the promotion of a culture of tolerance and peace at all levels, based on respect for human rights and diversity of religion and belief. This was then followed in April 2011 with the OIC's release of its annual report on Islamophobia, which had sections titled, quote, Opposition to Ground Zero Cultural Center and Other Mosques, and the, quote, Tea Party movement's role in fanning Islamophobia, both of which were sections that could come out of the DNC's white papers. What a strange coincidence that the political enemies of Barack Obama were a major subject and critical in the OIC's report. It is one of the report's few instances of applauding American virtue. It states that it was, quote, encouraged to note that despite such pressure, the project was given approval, the Ground Zero Mosque, by the concerned authorities in New York. And on August 13, 2010, in a speech at the annual White House Iftar dinner celebrating the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, where Barack Obama acknowledged the right of Muslims to build the center. New York Mayor Bloomberg, one of the strong supporters of the project, backed Mr. Obama's statements, adding that it reminded him of George Washington. Further, the Islamophobia report contains a separate section criticizing Pastor Terry Jones, who planned to burn the Quran, but also applauded the historically unforeseen outrage and involvement in the highest echelons of American government to a singular act. While it seemed widely outside the mandate of the Department of Defense to be involved in a private domestic non-combative act, especially when Secretary Gates personally called Jones to express concern about the planned burning, the report notes that Jones, whose congregation is minuscule, I mean it can go 25 people at the most, faced, quote, widespread condemnation from the U.S. political and religious leadership, including those by President Obama, Secretary of State Clinton, Attorney General Holder, the U.S. State Department, U.S. embassies abroad. It is evident that by the Obama administration's wide and unified preemptive condemnation of Jones during the 2010 summer, the OIC and Obama had somewhat of a meeting of minds. On December 14th in 2011, Hillary Clinton held a closed-door meeting with representatives from 30 countries, the Istanbul process, and international organizations including the OIC, which had representatives from Egypt, Indonesia, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan. Earlier on December 12th, Department of Justice Attorney General for the Civil Rights Division, Thomas Perez, in the Istanbul process, in his comments released, stated that HRC 1618, that's the Istanbul, where the Istanbul process is to be implemented, wants to, quote, assert such principles, however, it is equally or even more important to ensure that such principles are put into practice. Perez follows these remarks by comparing the Istanbul process to the, quote, 100 years in a civil war that took hundreds of thousands of lives to end slavery. Mind you, he made these remarks as representatives of countries which presently legalized slavery. This past July, a high-ranking justice official, Perez again, refused to publicly oppose the implementation of the defamation of religions concept in Congressman Frank's hearing. Further, the same OIC Secretary General who participated in the State Department meetings has just called in the most recent UN Assembly for an outright international ban on blasphemy of the Prophet Muhammad. So let's go into the video. This video had less than 1,000 hits. Some said less than 700 hits before September 11, 2012. Recently, by the way, I want to applaud YouTube. They just announced they're not pulling it down. As Andy McCarthy explains in his new book, quote, How Obama Embraces Islam's Sharia Agenda, he says, quote, the ruling class, opinion elites in government, academia, and media, the purveyors of conventional wisdom insist that we need only concern ourselves with the fringe all like Romney here, with a handful of violent extremists. So how did the ruling class react to the Islamist barbarism across the Middle East from this video, allegedly? Media figures, government officials, and legal academics began to argue during the news cycle that the speech which impinges on Islamic sensibility should be domestically criminalized. Obama, in his recent address, told the UN that the future does not lie with those who defame the Prophet Muhammad. By the way, incidentally, I'm yet to find a speech where the president has mentioned Jesus Christ. Hillary Clinton told Charles Wood, the father of slain SEAL Tyrone Woods, that the filmmaker will be arrested. She continually apologized to the world for the video from the Rose Garden, from the Office of the State, and we bought $700,000 worth of ads to apologize for the video in Pakistan. Sarah Chase, former special assistant to the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the Obama administration, authored an LA Times editorial arguing that the trailer was a type of speech that is not afforded First Amendment protection. In academia, Eric Posner, University of Chicago Law School professor, argued in a Slate editorial that the vile anti-Muslim video shows that the U.S. overvalues free speech. On the media, MSNBC columnist Mike Barnacle, who Mr. Levin would commonly note is a plagiarist, suggested prosecuting Pastor Terry Jones as an accessory to the Libyan ambassador Ryan Stevens' death because Jones endorsed the video. Now, some will argue that I'm just being an alarmist, that something like this would never happen in our courts. It can't be seen. You know, it's scary. Well, let me tell you about a case that we have, the legal project. We're representing Mr. Ernest Purse. On October 11, 2011, the borough of Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, held a Halloween parade. Ernest Purse, of the Parisian Atheists of Central Pennsylvania, appeared in the parade as Zombie Mohammed, carrying a sign that read Muhammad of Islam. During the parade, Mr. Taliq El-Bayoumi stepped from the crowd of spectators and attacked Mr. Purse. Mr. Purse made a video recording of the attack and promptly reported it to Mechanicsburg Police Sergeant Brian Curtis, telling Sergeant Curtis Mr. Bayoumi attempted to choke him and take the sign. Sergeant Curtis later testified that Mr. El-Bayoumi admitted to the attack and charged Mr. El-Bayoumi with harassment. In the trial, Mr. Purse, Sergeant Curtis, and El-Bayoumi all testified before Mechanicsburg Magisterial District Court Judge Mark W. Moore. During his testimony, Mr. El-Bayoumi, that's the defendant, explains, who's a resident of America from Egypt, explains, quote, what upset me is that Mr. Purse revoked my prophet, and, quote, whatever he was doing by law was not allowed. Mr. El-Bayoumi then explained his contact against Mr. Purse was justified because, quote, I tried to convince him that's not Muhammad of Islam. Nobody knows what he looks like. We respect him, so I do not want anybody to not respect him. So he used his own religious views as the justification for his harassment charge. By the way, we have a list. You know, it's ironic because in the mid-century, wealthy Muslims commissioned or even drew paintings of Muhammad. And they're all over the internet. So I don't know where this newfound hysteria comes from, but let's see. Mr. Purse then played the video recording of the
mid-century, you mean 2000? Or 1900, 1950s?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mid-century.
1600s, 1700s. I can email them to you.
Oh, okay, you mean Middle Ages?
Yeah. Middle Ages.
That's what you said.
Middle Ages, yeah. Middle Ages, excuse me. Mr. Peirce played the video recording of the incident, and before even considering the relevant criminal statute, Judge Martin said to Mr. Peirce, so Judge Martin says to the victim, "This makes you look like a doofus." Then expounded at length as to Islam, including the following. Many other Muslim-speaking countries, Arabic-speaking countries, call it Muslim. Something like this is definitely against the law there. In their society, in fact, it could be punishable by death, and frequently is in their society. Islam is not just a religion, it's their culture, their very essence. He also said that we, quote, "we refer to as ugly Americans because we value our First Amendment rights." So my conclusion, I believe that the Islamic community in America needs to understand that freedom of worship in America, in our country, provides them exactly with that, the freedom of worship. Any image they're insulted by does not mean they're not afforded freedom of worship. Anything that is hurtful or insensitive is simply that, hurtful and insensitive. The Nazis can march in Skokie, Illinois, Jesus can be placed in cow dung, and a cartoon of Muhammad can be published wearing a bomb. I also suggest or propose that during the confirmation process, judges, federal judges, should be asked their opinions on the application of Islamic law in the U.S. court system. Ultimately, the best course of action was proposed by our president, Dr. Daniel Pipes, in a September 21st column, where he suggested, quote, "What would happen if publishers and managers of major media reached a consensus? Enough of this intimidation. We will publish the most famous Danish Mohammed cartoon every day until the Islamists tire out and no longer riot. What would happen if instances of Quran burning happen recurrently?" So this is my plea to all Western editors and producers. Display the Muhammad cartoon daily until the Islamists get used to the fact that we turn sacred cows into hamburgers. Thank you.